California Supreme Court wipes the Taxpayer Protection Act off this November's ballot in a unanimous decision. So that and much more coming up here today on the Commercial Real Estate Report, the show that is empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate. I'm your host, Chris Berg. We're going to get right to it today. Joining us right now, he's the president of the California Business Roundtable, Rob Lapsley. Rob, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you.
Chris, it's always a pleasure. And again, thank you for what you do for the community in addressing these issues.
I really appreciate you saying that. A lot to discuss. You're also California Governor Gavin Newsom just wrapped up his State of the State address, so we'll touch on that in a moment as well. Quickly, though, for the people that aren't familiar with the Taxpayer Protection Act, two things. One, if you give us a quick debrief on that, and then maybe more importantly, what was the decision just recently made? Again, a unanimous decision by the California Supreme Court.
So, the statewide business community obviously recognizes that if they don't step up and take a leadership role on the major issues affecting the state, particularly regarding cost of living, the ability for housing, our high rate of taxes facing the highest level of poverty, everything that's affecting the state, we're not going to have a future workforce at some point if we don't help. And so the business community made the decision with the California Business Roundtable, California Business Properties Association, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association to try and address some of the major tax issues that impacts everyday Californians, most importantly, but also provide some certainty and predictability for businesses to try and grow here, invest here, hopefully bring jobs here, and then plan for the long-term future. So we had a lot to be able to try and reform with this measure. And what this measure did, very simply, is it gave every Californian the right to vote on future state and local taxes. That is it. Gary Brown did that in his third term. He said no, he would never sign a tax to the legislature unless the people voted on it first. So it's something that's been in effect in the past. So we wanted to go back and fix a couple court cases that had changed how some of the local special taxes work. Courts had created problems with the definition of what's a fee and what's a tax. So the people of California understood what is a fee should be and what a tax should be, but also that local government can make a huge profit on local government fees. And we also had all sorts of new transparency and accountability language. So when people went in to vote on taxes, they could see exactly how much it was, how much it was going to cost them, how long they were going to pay it, and where the money was actually supposed to go. Everything you don't see now when you go in to vote at the ballot box on taxes. So the governor, primarily the labor unions, the public employee unions in this state, the legislature, when we qualified this measure through an outstanding coalition, over 1.4 million signatures. We have a huge coalition built, over 170 organizations in California, thousands of individuals who support this measure and wanted to see it passed in November. The legislature, the governor, the unions were petrified that we would actually ensure the people of California had the right to vote on future taxes. And it's not us assuring them, it's the people themselves having the opportunity to make the decision on whether they wanted that power in the future. Essentially, it was returning and ensuring power from the government back to the people on some of these issues, which is exactly what they don't want because of the spending plans for the future on progressive issues and how they intend to pay for it. There's a reason why we're the highest tax state in the country. And so what they did is they went to the Supreme Court. They challenged our measure, saying that we should not be on the ballot. The people of California, even though it's duly qualified and had been for a year and a half for the November election, should not have the fundamental, basic, constitutional right to vote on this. They challenged us in the Supreme Court. They said that our measure was too big. It was a revision to the Constitution which is a different process under law and not a change to the Constitution. When we went through the arguments before the court, the governor's lawyers said, and I quote, that this measure needs to be taken off the ballot because the people of California do not have the capacity to make these decisions on taxes and fees. It needs to be left in the hands of the legislature and the legislature staff who has a process to deal with this. It was singularly the biggest slap in the face to the people of California that I have literally ever heard of in my career. And we waited for the court's decision, which came out last Thursday. And what we feared from the beginning when they filed this lawsuit, because all of the appointees of the court are either appointed by Jerry Brown or Gavin Newsom, except for one left over from Arnold Schwarzenegger. We feared that we could win. We were confident that we could win. Chris, you and I talked about that in the past and had a great discussion. What we feared all along with the court was that we couldn't prevail on the politics of the court. And that's exactly what happened last Thursday. The politics of the court won out. The people of California lost out in what happened. They determined that it was a revision, which has only happened once before and essentially in history. And the framers of our direct democracy process through the statewide initiative process, Hiram Johnson, turned over in his grave last Thursday with this decision, because they've taken the power away from the people of California on taxation matters and returned it to state government, or given it even more power at state government, and will never have the opportunity to get it back.
A couple of things I want you to speak to is one, at least from based on the research I did, this is the first time since 1999 that the Supreme Court has removed a ballot initiative, again, in the courts. And I think one of the things that's really important, and I think why you see what's happening within our country today is many people are saying, hey, can we just make Lady Justice blind again, right? Like, we don't want politics within the legal decisions. So if you want to address that. And then secondly, this is the ultimate, in my opinion, taxation by representation. Last time we didn't have taxation with representation, I think there's some tea dumped in the Boston Harbor. So, it's an interesting dynamic that could be taking place.
Well, again, as you see the increased spending, we went from $100 billion surplus, to a $60 billion plus deficit literally overnight. The economy accounts for some of that, but it's the spending that's going on to be able to provide, the resources for all the progressive programs. And we're not saying some of the programs aren't positive. What we're saying is, how do you continue to pay for it? And one of the issues I think that's important to understand is that when you have a shift from a surplus to a deficit like this, there's no discussion that goes on in Sacramento about, oh my goodness, we need to do some major changes for business so that we can grow our job space to help make up for this deficit and grow our revenues in the future for future state services. All they talk about is, how can we tax more? And the legislature, they want to get, and many of the public employee unions, they want to get to a personal income tax rate of 20%. On high income earners. They think that's a spot where it's more fair and balanced, and that's what they intend to work on. So by filing this initiative, they had a court that clearly is no longer independent. The court is part or a third branch of the progressive agenda. We have a long-term 2/3 supermajority legislature that's now going to be continuing to pursue this path. We implemented the initiative process in 1906 to stop the Southern Pacific Railroad, who had too much power. And we filed this initiative to try and stop the public employee unions, who today have too much power. And the court said, we're going to give them more power. That's something all of business needs to understand and prepare for moving forward.
So I want to talk about what this decision means really for the future of California. You mentioned businesses here just a moment ago in your introduction comments. And I say all that in the context of we've seen the exodus of the state. I think 2 months in a row now, California's had the highest unemployment in the nation, above 5%. So what does this Supreme Court decision mean for the future of California?
So what it means is that if we try to pass future reforms under this court, particularly on what we tried to do with TPA, they're going to file continued challenges at the Supreme Court level. It puts the courts right in the middle of the initiative process. They've always erred on the side of let the people decide the measure, and then we'll look at the measure after it's been voted on. That's no longer the case. They're right smack in the middle of now making decisions of what should the people even vote on. And that is a direct attack on direct democracy in California. The other thing to try and put this in perspective is, particularly for business and property owners, is that our measure did far less than what Prop 13 ever did in 1978. And thank God we have Prop 13 for residential homeowners, which is keeping them in their homes, and obviously for business, because it helps our overall economy while we continue to achieve record property tax revenues. And under this court, Prop 13 would have never been on the ballot in November. They would have struck Prop 13 down like they struck us down. It would have never been on the ballot. And that is exactly what is in front of business now moving forward.
And just so people can understand, what again is Prop 13?
So Prop 13 is singularly the only last property tax protection that we have in the state, passed in 1978 by over 75% of the voters in a revolt because property taxes for residential and commercial and industrial retail property were going up too quickly, and people were losing literally their homes on a month-by-month basis. It said that it establishes your property tax basis is what your purchase price is, and it can go up no more than 1.5% to 2% a year. So you have long-term predictability and certainty on what you're going to pay on your property taxes in the future while you own property.
And I think what's fascinating is you just mentioned, and you're so used to this, but you just kind of threw it out there, is the fact that based on what you said, property taxes are at record levels right now in California,
Yes.
right?
Yes, record levels.
And I think what's so critical for people to understand, speaking to Sacramento, is that's all businesses want is just certainty. You just mentioned the power of Prop 13 is it gave family owners and businesses certainty. We can deal with regulations and this just provide some certainty so we can make some investments and know that, hey, this is going to go beyond 12 to 24 months. So anything you want to add to that?
Well, you said it perfectly, and certainty is key. So let's talk about, if we could, just when it comes to certainty, what's coming. Because with this court decision, there's going to be a full-scale frontal attack on Proposition 13, because the unions, their number one goal is to get rid of Proposition 13 for all properties, including residential. I know that sounds insane, but that's their goal, because it's going to bring in $30 billion plus more a year in new taxes. So one of the—
interrupt you for a moment. I
Please.
apologize.
No,
but
please.
It's really important that is pure speculation, right? And they thought the same thing with the quote unquote mansion tax in LA. Like, hey, this is going to generate all this revenue for the home, and now that they've actually implemented it, it's actually reduced the revenue dramatically.
Correct. That's true. So we would have to wait and see. It's an excellent point. Remember, as we've discussed in the past, our measure would have invalidated ULA and would have had to gone back out and get a revote on it at the third level. All of that is gone away for right now. Other than there's still appeals going on, but there's no recourse to try and strike down. I don't think for a second that didn't factor into the thinking of the courts. But one of the successes that we had with with our measure TPA was that we kept a lot of taxes off the ballot, and we kept a split roll property tax off the ballot, which is again what the unions put forward in 2020 that changed the proposition base taxation rate for commercial, industrial, and retail property versus residential property, so that they could get at least part of that additional tax revenue, $13 to $15 billion a year in new revenue. And the Business Roundtable, along with our coalition, we defeated that in 2020, but it's already being organized and will be on the 26th ballot because TPA was struck down by the courts.
Wow. All right, let's talk about this for a few more minutes. We have you. And this just sort of happened to work out because we had booked you to join us today last week. And then this morning, Governor Gavin Newsom put out his pre-recorded State of the State address in the context of business and real estate. What's the most important thing people should take away from it?
Well, the governor this morning did this pre-recorded address. It's obviously 2 days prior to the presidential election. It was, very slickly produced, but it gave the governor's definition on where California stands today and all of our successes, and which is much different, without question, than where business and the average person is and their interpretation and belief in where California is today. There's no question that Gavin Newsom's poll ratings are going down quickly. He's down in the 40s on his approval rating. We've been watching it sink like a rock over these past 6 months because of what's been happening. Budget deficit, $24 billion spent on homeless, and his own administration could not answer the question in the legislature of how many homeless people they have served or what they have done to get results. We have things like that across the board, no matter how much money is spent. With his State of the State today being pre-recorded, there's no tough questions from the reporters questioning his facts and what he put out in his interpretation of California. There's a lot of, obviously, things that he said that are broadly open to a lot of tough questions. So probably smart on his part to do that, not getting those questions. But I got to tell you, when you watch it, is our governor truly in touch with where things are today in California?
Last question. I think, I've been back here now for about 15 months. Everybody I talk to, and again, maybe I'm in different bubbles, but everybody I talk to agrees the state is not going in the right direction. Kind of a twofold question. One, what do you think it's going to take to get maybe some of the cities in Sacramento to turn things back around, or at least be more open to business? Because everybody you talk to outside the state says, hey, it's so punitive in California, it's tough to do business. And then secondly, if, let's say, after this November election, there's a new Trump administration, does that make a difference for California or not?
Boy, some good questions. Certainly we would hope. There's certain cities, as we know, that are definitely open for business, but certain cities need to completely reform themselves from top to bottom. Unfortunately, under this court decision, there's no incentive to do that because they're going to be able to continue to look at how they raise revenues with no changes, no reforms. So that's a concern for the future on where we go. And in terms of looking ahead for California, that, if Trump wins, that is going to make California, our concern is it'll react to Trump and make it dig in even more on the progressive agenda. At the same time, if we're going to change the state, we were pushing the initiative, so it would try and let the voters' voice be heard on changing the state. But now that the voters' voice won't be heard, the most important and quickest way to try and change California is through who we elect as the next governor in 26. So who that is going to be critically important to determine if we continue to go on this same path, which is going to be taxes, deficits, and all of this spending without accountability or results, or if we actually get somebody who's going to look at building our job base to fund services so that we can grow our jobs, build more houses, lower our prices, keep a check on taxes, and do everything, Chris, that you and I know we need to do to make it attractive to future business.
Lot to digest there, Rob. As always, I appreciate your insight. Let's do this again, and thank you for what you do.
Thank you for always the opportunity for the discussion, and we look forward to having that anytime.
Thank you very much. Again, love to know your thoughts. Please share this interview with colleagues, people in your industry. This is the Commercial Real Estate Report, empowering you to build generational wealth with real estate.